Callers, study up now. Tap like, hit subscribe, and let's go.
Question 1. Minnesota CDL holders must notify the state within 15 days of a change in mailing address. True or false? False. The notification requirement is within 30 days to remain compliant with Minnesota CDL regulations. Question 2. In Minnesota, a Class B CDL allows the driver to operate any single vehicle with a GVWR of 26,001 pounds or more, but it cannot tow more than 10,000 pounds GVWR. True or false? True. A Class B CDL in Minnesota authorizes operation of large single vehicles, but restricts trailers to 10,000 pounds GVWR unless a higher class is obtained. Question 3. The Minnesota CDL Knowledge Test is considered passed with a score of at least 70%. True or false? False. A passing score requires answering at least 80% of the questions correctly, not 70%. Question 4. In Minnesota, the K restriction on a CDL indicates that the driver may not operate a commercial vehicle outside of Minnesota. True or false? True. The K restriction signifies an intrastate-only CDL, limiting operation to within state boundaries. Question 5. In Minnesota, CDL applicants must certify to only one of 4 types of driving: interstate non-accepted, interstate accepted, intrastate non-accepted, or intrastate accepted. True or false? True. Federal self-certification requirements apply in Minnesota, and applicants must choose one category that fits their driving type. Question 6. Minnesota recognizes a 150 air-mile farm vehicle CDL exemption for intrastate operations. True or false? True. Farmers operating qualifying farm trucks within 150 air miles and carrying farm ID don't need a CDL. Question 7. CDL holders in Minnesota may have their license disqualified for 1 year if they refuse to submit to a chemical test under implied consent laws. True or false? True. Refusal to test triggers an automatic 1-year disqualification for a first offense. Question 8. In Minnesota, the S endorsement is required only for drivers transporting children under age 10. True or false? False. The S endorsement is required for all school bus drivers, regardless of the passengers' ages. Question 9. A Minnesota CDL learner's permit is valid for 6 months and can be renewed only once within a 2-year period. True or false? True. This ensures applicants complete testing within a reasonable time frame. Question 10. The Minnesota CDL pre-trip inspection test must be completed in 30 minutes or less. True or false? False. There is no strict 30-minute limit, but the inspection must be thorough and cover all required components. Question 11. In Minnesota, operating a CMV with a BAC of 0.04 or higher will result in disqualification. True or false? True. The .04 BAC limit is the federal standard adopted by Minnesota. Question 12. Minnesota CDL drivers transporting placarded amounts of hazardous materials must have a Federal Transportation Worker Identification Credential, TWIC, in addition to the hazmat endorsement. True or false? False. A TWC is not required by Minnesota for all hazmat drivers, only for those entering secure maritime facilities. Question 13. The Minnesota CDL road test includes straight line backing, offset backing, and parallel parking maneuvers. True or false? True. These are standard skills evaluated in the Basic Control Skills Test. Question 14. In Minnesota, the L restriction indicates the driver cannot operate a CMV with air brakes. True or false? True. This restriction applies when the driver either fails the air brake test or takes the skills test in a vehicle without air brakes. Question 15. Minnesota requires that any vehicle used for a CDL skills test must have valid insurance, registration, and inspection documentation. True or false? True. Failure to provide this documentation will result in cancellation of the test. Question 16. In Minnesota, drivers must carry a valid medical examiner's certificate only if operating in interstate commerce. True or false? False. Most interstate and intrastate non-accepted drivers must carry a valid medical examiner's certificate. Question 17. A Minnesota CDL holder will be disqualified for life if convicted of 2 major offenses involving a CMV. True or false? True. This applies to violations like DUI, leaving the scene, or using a CMV to commit a felony. Question 18. The P endorsement in Minnesota allows the transport of passengers for compensation without a background check. True or false? False. A background check is required for passenger transport in Minnesota, especially for certain types of carriers. Question 19. In Minnesota, hazardous materials endorsement applicants must pass a security threat assessment conducted by the TSA. True or false? True. This is a federal requirement applied by the Minnesota DPS. Question 20. The Minnesota CDL Manual states that downshifting before entering a curve helps maintain control and stability. True or false? True. Proper downshifting provides engine braking and better handling through curves. Question 21. In Minnesota, CMV drivers must perform cargo securement inspections within the first 50 miles of a trip and at least every 150 miles thereafter. True or false? False. The recheck interval is within the first 50 miles, then every 3 hours or 150 miles, whichever comes first. Question 22. The Minnesota CDL Manual states that only drivers with the doubles or triples endorsement may tow triple trailers. True or false? True. The T endorsement is required to tow doubles or triples in the state. Question 23. In Minnesota, school bus drivers must stop between 15 and 50 feet from a railroad crossing before proceeding. True or false? True. This ensures sufficient time to check for trains before crossing. Question 24. The Minnesota CDL vision requirement includes a minimum of 20/40 acuity in each eye, with or without corrective lenses. True or false? True. This meets the federal standard adopted by Minnesota. Question 25. Minnesota CMV drivers are permitted to use the trailer hand valve while driving to control trailer sway. True or false? False. The trailer hand valve is for testing only and should not be used while driving. Question 26. In Minnesota, the low air warning device must activate when air pressure drops to 55 psi or higher. True or false? True. This provides time to stop safely before air pressure is lost. Question 27. The Minnesota CDL Manual allows fueling a bus with passengers aboard as long as the engine is off. True or false? False. Fueling with passengers on board is prohibited except under very limited conditions, such as in emergencies. Question 28. In Minnesota, using a radar detector in a CMV is prohibited by law. True or false? True. Federal law bans radar detectors in CMVs, and Minnesota enforces this rule. Question 29. A Minnesota driver who fails the hazmat knowledge test must wait 14 days before retaking it. True or false? False. While there is a waiting period between attempts, Minnesota does not set a fixed 14-day delay for knowledge tests. Question 30. In Minnesota, a CDL holder must report any conviction for traffic violations, except parking, in another state to their employer within 30 days. True or false? True. This is a federal requirement enforced by Minnesota. Question 31. Minnesota requires all CMV drivers to use headlights during precipitation, regardless of time of day. True or false? True. This improves visibility and safety in rain, snow, sleet, or hail. Question 32. The Minnesota CDL Manual specifies that buses must not be refueled inside an enclosed building with passengers on board. True or false? True. This reduces the risk of fire or explosion. Question 33. In Minnesota, operating a CMV without the proper class of CDL is considered a serious traffic violation. True or false? True. This can contribute to disqualification if multiple serious violations occur. Question 34. Minnesota allows CMV drivers to operate without a CDL if they are driving an emergency vehicle. True or false? True. Emergency vehicle operators are generally exempt from CDL requirements under certain conditions. Question 35. When stopping on a two-lane road in Minnesota, reflective triangles must be placed at 10 feet, 100 feet, and 200 feet toward approaching traffic. True or false? True. This matches the federal placement guidelines adopted by the state. Question 36. The Minnesota CDL Manual advises against using low gears when descending steep hills. True or false? False. Low gears should be used to help control speed and reduce brake wear. Question 37. In Minnesota, a CMV driver may be disqualified for 60 days if convicted of 2 serious traffic violations in 3 years. True or false? True. 3 or more violations in that period result in a longer disqualification. Question 38. In Minnesota, air tank drain valves should be opened daily to remove moisture and oil buildup. True or false? True. This helps prevent brake system damage. Question 39. The Minnesota CDL Manual states that drivers should check mirrors every 2 to 3 seconds while driving. True or false? True. Frequent mirror checks help monitor traffic and blind spots. Question 40. The M restriction on a Minnesota CDL indicates no operation of manual transmission CMVs. True or false? True. This applies if the skills test is taken in an automatic transmission vehicle. Question 41. In Minnesota, the proper following distance for CMVs under 40 miles per hour is 1 second for every 20 feet of vehicle length. True or false? False. The correct distance is 1 second for every 10 feet of vehicle length under 40 miles per hour. Question 42. Minnesota CMV drivers must yield the right-of-way to emergency vehicles using lights and sirens. True or false? True. Failure to yield can result in fines and points on the driving record. Question 43. The Minnesota CDL Manual requires drivers to test service brakes at speeds under 5 miles per hour to check for pulling or delayed stopping. True or false? True. This is part of the on-the-road inspection procedure. Question 44. In Minnesota, drivers with a CDL can be cited for driving a non-CMV under the influence if their BAC is 0.04 or higher. True or false? False. The 0.04 limit applies only while operating a CMV. Non-CMV limits follow standard DUI laws. Question 45. Minnesota requires that all school buses be equipped with a crossing control arm on the front bumper. True or false? True. This device forces children to cross far enough in front of the bus to be seen by the driver. Question 46. The Minnesota CDL Manual specifies that wheel chocks must be used when performing certain brake system tests. True or false? True. This is a safety precaution to prevent vehicle movement during testing. Question 47. Minnesota law requires all CMVs to stop at weigh stations unless directed otherwise by posted signs or officials. True or false? True. Ignoring weigh station requirements can result in citations. Question 48. In Minnesota, the E restriction indicates no operation of CMVs with air brakes. True or false? False. The E restriction indicates automatic transmission only. The L restriction applies to air brakes. Question 49. A Minnesota CDL holder transporting hazardous materials must have shipping papers within arm's reach and visible to anyone entering the cab. True or false? True. This ensures quick access in case of inspection or emergency. Question 50. An empty trailer has better traction than a fully loaded one in Minnesota due to less weight. True or false? False. Loaded trailers have better traction. Empty trailers are more prone to skidding.
That's it for this one. Still feeling unsure? Grab your cheat sheet or hit the next video to stay sharp.